Hello, and welcome to the Studio 78 podcast. I am your host, Nache, from NacheSnow.com. Welcome. Okay, people. Welcome to season 8. There has been a little bit of a delay, more than usual, maybe 3, maybe 4 months since the last season. But I needed a little bit of a break. There was a lot going on. Things are starting to pick up because we're kind of coming out of the pandemic. And so I wanted to make sure that when I started back, I had time to dedicate to the podcast. And so thank you for your patience. I appreciate you guys hitting me up in DMs and emails and comments like, where's the podcast? Because then I know someone out there was missing it and waiting to hear more wonderful stories from more wonderful women entrepreneurs. And I promise not to disappoint this season. And today I'm talking to Justine Swindell, and she is an artist here in DC who does her passion on nights and weekends. So we talk about just her journey to getting there, how she diversifies her incomes, makes space for what she does, and why she chooses to still do it on her nights and weekends. So I think you're really going to enjoy the story. It's the perfect one to just kick off this season. Also know this season on the podcast, Nache who's a photographer. I've had her on the podcast before. She is going to do some mini episodes. I got the feedback that people wanted to have a few more solo episodes from me during the different seasons, but I'm such an extrovert. I like feed off of other people. So I need someone that I can bounce ideas off of and talk about new trends and talk about different perspectives on how, to stay organized and all the things. So Nache is going to be that person for me. So now every few episodes, it'll be her and I coming on, and we're just going to be talking about everything from photography to packaging to new trends out there like NFTs to you name it. And so if you have anything that you want us to chat about, that you want to know more about, please be sure to email me at hello@nachesnow.com. Okay. So, since this is my first episode of the season, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a favor. I want this to blow up on Apple Podcasts and push me back up the charts since I've been gone for a while. So, if you could share this episode with your friends, that would be great. The show notes are at nachesnow.com/124. But of course, they can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, you name it, all the things. But please share it like crazy. Share the Instagram post, share the Facebook post. I really want to get a big boost this week just to get me back on the charts. So if you could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. It's helping a small podcaster just get these stories of these amazing women out even more. And of course, if you enjoy this episode and if you enjoy this podcast, please head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave me a 5-star review. That also helps with ratings. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please click the thumbs up and the sharing. Of course, sharing is caring, my friends. Please share away. Okay, people, let's get into this first episode. You're going to love her. Justine is freaking amazing. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Hello, Justine. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
I am really excited to get into your whole story. I just think your art is absolutely beautiful. But before we get into why and how you started your business, can you just tell the listeners a little bit about you before you started all of this?
Yes, absolutely. And I will say it's not a very linear story. It's a lot of ups and downs. I currently consider myself a multidisciplinary artist. And so I I do illustration, I do some graphic design, I do some fine art, I do murals. And so I'm at a place now where I am, selling art and doing art services, but I definitely spent a big chunk of my career up to date not working in art field at all. But with that said, I started out as a child very much into art. I come from a family of artists. My mother's a painter. She studied studio art in undergrad and has painted my whole life to this day. She paints every day. My siblings are artists. My brothers studied, drawing and computer design and acting. And my sister's a landscape architect. And my uncle's an amazing fine art painter. And so these things were just always surrounded by me. And plus, I grew up in DC and was always in museums and had this really great art influence in part of my life. Oh, I
Born to
grew
be
up
an artist.
drawing. Yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't denied, so to speak, and I hear people say a lot like, oh, my parents were just, that was the last thing they wanted me to do. My parents didn't necessarily push in any direction, but it was never going to be weird if the kids did something in art related. But with that said, I grew up in DC. I definitely was personally aware of wanting, stability for my life and was a little bit worried about what an art career would look like for me. Even though I loved it, I was kind of like, okay, well, I think like some people do, I was like, if I study something like graphic design, that's more kind of business related, that's more something that maybe can get me a 9-to-5 job that's going to let me pay my bills, So
Right.
I studied, which, is not necessarily true. I think there's a lot of other ways now that we know. I mean, this is 1999 when I was, graduating high school. It's different now. I feel like we know so much more, but back then it just felt like there's only a couple lanes to kind of go. And the fine art world that I knew here in DC was way out of my league. And I'm like, I'm good, but I don't think I'm going to be going for my MFA and painting for my life. I just didn't picture that. So I studied visual / graphic design, was kind of a combined program. And it was excellent. I actually really enjoyed the work, but I was super intimidated by some of the computer aspects. So I was taking, at the time, it was Quark and Photoshop and Illustrator, and I was introduced to it. And in 18, 19, feeling pretty good about my drawing and painting skills, but pretty crappy about my digital skills. And was like a little defeated, especially because I was like, I will have a running start because I'm already an artist. And it was like, womp womp, no, there's people in here who cannot draw a stick figure, but are killing
No,
it
it's
on
very
this
different.
digital.
I mean, people think it's the
Yes,
same, but it's different, right? Yeah.
it is very different. I mean, it's just like I thought I could avoid math my whole life. And once you're really thinking in those terms, and really as an artist too, you do have to think, and everything is proportion and all that stuff, but you really have to kind of dig into that. And at the time that was intimidating for me. And I did okay though. I was getting A's and B's, but in my mind, I was like, well, I could probably get straight A's if I was studying something where it was a test and I could get 100% and not this like subjectiveness of art school where people's opinions, I just kind of was like, forget it. So I was like, I'm going to transfer schools. The school's too expensive anyway. And I'm going to study business management. And when I went there, I actually was going to do a double major, but if I took all those credits, long story short, like I just had to do a minor because that school, I couldn't transfer 2 years of credits over. I, in the end, taking classes at the second school as well, I probably would have graduated. I definitely had enough credits for a double degree, but my actual degree is business management, minor design. And so I came out in the world, but really still working all those things. That's where I didn't realize, like, learning things like Photoshop and Illustrator are huge. I was immediately got like school jobs in the marketing departments. I was designing all the student guides, like I worked in the sports information office and I designed all the media guides, and I was doing posters for friends, and I was promoting people's events, and I was doing cartooniture kind of political cartoons for the newspaper, and I was doing all these things. I still wasn't clicking that I could really work it. But I tried. My sisters were out in LA. My siblings were much older than me. I graduated college with no health insurance, no money, no savings, no backup plan. And my sisters were like, come out and sleep on my couch and let's figure it out. And I was like, okay. So they got me a ticket, and I had already been out there a lot visiting growing up. And I do love the West Coast. So I went and I started working. I was working summer camps and stuff. And then I got a job through a family relative that my sister's husband that he was like working in production at the time. He's like, well, if you want to kind of really see the design world, come take like a production coordinator position at one of these places, and you can kind of maybe get a sense of it. And this was like animation and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, oh yes, definitely. Now this is my in. I'm gonna like do so good. And so I went and I started working this place. And I'm gonna tell you, I look back on it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this place I was working on, and I'm 39. So back, if people can remember, like when the first Apple commercials were coming out with like the silhouette kind of fit. So we were working on those. I was in a post-production office, this like small team. Yeah. And so I wasn't an animator by any means. You know, I was working with animators, but I was working on the coordination side, the formatting. And I mean, it was like, I was like in it. I was like, oh, this is the industry, just like a bunch of people working till 4 a.m. Sitting in a dark room, you know? And so I was like, okay. But I think the part that bothered me is that it was not, one, I wasn't really creatively working. And I, in hindsight, I see I probably could have looked over some different things, but it was really hard. I was pretty anxious about it. I didn't fit in. I was this young kid from the East Coast, Black girl. I was just not, there's no one like me in that space. I didn't have any coping. I was some like scary executive producers. And I was just like, I'm not really I did not kill it. Like I was like didn't bring anything to the table, so to speak, which I always tell younger people, like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to not be great at something in the beginning. Just sit it out. It's just like stick in there. And I didn't have that capacity. I was just like, I guess this isn't for me. And this isn't probably the right field for me. And if this is what it's like, I don't know if I want to be in this environment. And so I had also, just by nature of the things I care about, the other side of my life has been, my dad was in a lot of community health work growing up, doing consulting in that space. And growing up in DC and just all the things the school I had graduated from was really heavy on social justice. And I had really gravitated to that as well, and actually shined a lot more in that space, so to speak. People really appreciated me. I had a lot of great organizational administrative skills. I had really great thoughts and points from my experiences growing up here that really meant something once I left home. And I started really getting into kind of this like wellness and health space. And that felt like that community was like, these are my people, so to speak.
You're like, I am home. Right.
And everyone's like, why would you walk away from a super cool industry job and go want to work at like hospitals and things like that? But it was just like, I felt needed. I felt valued. And at the time, that was something that helped me get through. And it paid me okay. And I was just coming from a space in my 20s, really figuring out how to survive and very afraid of not being able to support myself. Like that trumped everything. That fear and anxiety of not being able to support myself was like always something. And this felt very secure and safe, and people liked what I did and whatever. I ended up moving to New York, and I worked for Columbia University Medical Center for about 6 years. And it was everything I needed as far as contained, and gave me the environment that I needed. So the day ended at 4:30, and I could go like live. And I had health insurance for the first time. It was like all these things that really mattered to me. And I was still trying to figure myself out. But yeah, at that time, I still loved art. I just still couldn't picture. I'm like, how could it work where I wouldn't like hate it? I still drew all the time. I mean, they would joke about me because they had this big calendar in the back of our office that I would draw the seasons on. And they were like, Justine, what are you doing? And I had all these things. I had all these like little fine art postcards, and the physicians would come around and be like, they'd be like, what do you know about Mark Rothko? And I was like, well, like, I love art history. So it was just kind of this weird thing that I was like, this is something for me. And it was still something I did. I still drew and painted all the time for me.
Scratching at the surface, like, let me out, like, let the artist out.
Yes. Yeah. And I was living in New York, broke, living in Yonkers and in Harlem for like 7 years. All the things that inspired me were there. And it was a very great time for me to grow as a person. Tons of hard things happened to me as well, and to my family. And I just had to kind of just figure myself out, really just grow up. And so, and I think that, again, I admire I really admire people in their 20s who like do this now, because there's a lot to being a creative person and being able to stand with things that you want to do. I know sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
comes from just having a good support system or like a certain amount of confidence, but I did not have that at that time. And so other people would say it to me sometimes, but I'd be like, no, like not good enough kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But really once then but I was like, I did know I was doing some meaningful work. I started to have opportunities. I was recognized for the way in which I could multitask and work with others in my customer service and all that kind of stuff. I was working in education programming, and I worked with really great people. And I met my current husband. We knew each other already. We were friends, but we had started dating, and was moving into this new chapter of life, and I wanted to go to grad
Mm.
school. I wanted to advance my career. Long story short, we got married, moved to DC, back to DC where I'm from. Really, my mom had some health problems that made me feel better to be closer. And
Mm.
we kind of were
Mm.
like, we live in like 2 square feet in New York. Like that's
Right. Right.
I mean, he's not from there either. We're kind of like, maybe it's time for our shift. And when I moved down here, I started grad school, and I decided to study sociology because it kind of intersected some things that I cared about, public health, as well as just all the issues I generally care about, intersectionality and all these things. And why I was working in global health at the time, and I still do. And I was on a flight to Uganda, and life had been crazy because, I think I'm relocating, I'm getting married, I'm going to grad school, I'm working full time, doing all the things. And I was drawing on a flight, and I realized a shift in myself, quite literally. I felt really good about something I would create. I think it was a portrait of some kind. And I just felt like I want to be doing this. Like, I want to be doing this more. And
Mm. Like it's
I shared it
time.
on social media, which did not exist back when I used to scribble about. And people were like, what? Like,
Like,
you draw? I was like,
wait a minute.
you
And
didn't
like,
know
you
I
got these skills? When did you get these skills? Right.
listen. They were like, what? And I was like, oh, this little thing. I'm like, do you like it? And they were just like, what do you mean? What are you doing? And my husband would be like, this stack of drawings in your closet, we need to sell these things. And I'm like, really? And it just kind of started from there, and something clicked with me. I think, and I really do believe it was a bit of like being able to like create that stability I needed that decade prior for myself, and build a little more confidence in myself as a person. Gave me space, like having a partner that's great, it's still wonderful for me. It gave me space to dream again, like to not just be
Mm.
in survival mode, and to have the audacity to think, maybe I could be an artist again. Maybe I could do this. And
Mm.
slowly but surely, I mean, it was a slow walk, and it's still a slow walk for me. I accept that. But I started to really retrain myself on all the things more
Yeah.
seriously, not just for fun. And I spent those first couple years going back, got myself a new Wacom tablet, started going back to all my digital stuff, really perfected all the things I was afraid about in undergrad around Adobe Shop and Illustrator. I took some courses in illustration just specifically because I saw that was something I really was like feeling at the time,
Mm-hmm.
more so than the other mediums, and started sharing my work really. And everything from there has been taken off. I mean, not in a fast way, but it has progressed.
Well, let me just back up for a second.
Yeah.
Because just to summarize this for people, because I think this is good for people to know. Within a
Yeah.
span of a decade,
Yes.
you went from DC to Cali to New York to DC,
Yes.
and you had a trip to Uganda in there. You
Yeah.
studied,
Yes. Go
and
ahead.
then you studied design, business, a little sociology, right? Public health.
Yep. Yeah.
And I just wanted to just kind of like highlight some of that, only just to say, sometimes you have to try a few things, move a few
Mm-hmm.
different places before you realize what you're supposed to do. And I love the phrase you just said, which was space to dream again. That really
Mm-hmm.
resonates with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you have to go through a few things, and then there is sometimes this moment where you're just like, wait a minute, you know what? I let me just dabble in this thing that I've always loved. Like,
Yeah.
let me give it a try. So I love that you've shared that journey, because I feel like sometimes it takes a journey, right, to get us to where
Mm-hmm.
we need to be.
Yeah, and especially just just being able to finding your way is like a lot of things, but also being able to have something to say, because that's the thing with art too, is that I was always technically a B, person, like I was good enough that people are like, you can really draw that apple. Like, like I was good enough there, but, and I had a lot to say, but I wasn't combining it. I wasn't, that's what I mean, that flight, I started really feeling like I actually have a lot more I want to say creatively. I don't just want to say it in a paper. I don't really enjoy writing research papers. Like that was kind of the world I had got myself in. And, I love the work and the cause, but I was like, I feel like I could reach more people if I could bring a little bit of this in creating something artistically, and I can let the art speak for it a little bit and not always have to find all the words and things. So I think I saw opportunity there as well. And I just got excited. It was like, oh my gosh, like I can make art again. Like I can do this now. I don't have to be so freaked out. And I don't have to work. I don't have to work for like commercials. Like there's other ways to do this. And I started to see that. That's what I do love about the world of social media and all the things that have kind of given people their own control over the market and be able to show like you can work with a brand, or you can sell your work, or you can meet people and create your own kind of creative economy. You don't have to be dependent on these two types. Like you're working in magazines, you're working in entertainment, or you're painting for a museum. Like that's kind of how it seemed to me when I was younger, even though I don't think it was true back then either, but that's just all I knew. That's just kind of, that was the beginning. And it really needed to be a spark within me, not just people saying, you're a good artist, why don't you do that for a living?
You had to believe it.
100%. By the time I started, we were like, finally.
I know, right? We've been waiting for you to get on this because we knew you had it in you.
Yeah.
But so let me ask you a question. Like once that you got the spark, right? How did you get to where you are, right? I mean, you do some amazing illustrations, murals. How did you start to build this business? Because of course, a lot of artists, very good artists, right? They'll show some stuff online. People will be like, this is amazing. And then you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
So what did you do to make this a reality?
So it's two things. One, I really think the experience of working in these heavy deadline environments for so long had given me a new stamina and discipline that I didn't have at 19, right? So I really used that and applied it to the way I did my art. I would sit down and I would say, okay, one, I had now couldn't just pay my bills. I could afford to, buy that Wacom tablet and set myself up for success. I didn't know what that meant at a younger age, that you do need resources, you do need tools, you do need community, you do need things to help you kind of get there. I think it's really important in people's stories that I think sometimes people forget like how much was already in place for them in certain scenarios. Sometimes just the space to think. Like capacity is a real thing. That's what I talk about. That's in my other work. You learn very critically about life's chances, and that a lot of success is really just having the space to pursue your goals the way you want to. And so one, the space had to be there and it existed. And so that's one. And second, having the tools, right? Making sure I had the computer that could work for me, ordering materials to experiment. And then it's a daily practice. It's always been, but my practice became a lot more focused. And I guess I learned fine art and graphic design. The way of illustration that I was really coming attracted to, looking, kind of at Pinterest and looking at things online. And I was like, I really like fashion illustration. I don't want to work in fashion.
Right.
But I like
that style.
I really like that style. I like that minimal style. I like the way it feels. And I want to play with that technique. Right. And so I signed up for this course that was taught by a professor at Parsons. And I kind of just learned the basics of that as if I was designing fashion, but I'm not. And I learned this different kind of figure studies. I was trained totally in realist drawing, and I wanted to think more about caricature and kind of, exaggerating certain things, and that you get that more in illustration. So I learned that, and then I practiced that all the time. And then I would share some things I was drawing, really coming back to DC. DC had changed so much. I grew up in the 80s and 90s here. I came back and I was like, what? Like, I was visiting,
what's going
but
on?
then living here, I was like, this is the fastest gentrifying city in the US. Like, it was like, this is different. And I was kind of like, I didn't know how to be. I actually had like kind of become a New Yorker. I was like, I don't even know if I'm a DC person anymore. So I started, but art helped me reconnect with my hometown. Like, I started reaching out to people. I started doing going to shows like craft events and things like that, like being a vendor in my neighborhood, really just doing watercolor illustrations of like houses. I started painting architecture because that was something that felt the same to me. Like, there's something about the DC architecture here, and walking around, I'd be like, I don't recognize this, but this feels just like home to me. And I want to paint this row home or whatever. And I would paint that, and I would share these things, and I would get this really nice response from people, even new people moving to DC, that were like, I really love this. And I realized I had my own perspective to share there. And so I just started doing more of that. And just, I paid attention to also what people told me. I think that there is also important as an artist to not be so wrapped up in, I think this is beautiful. Yes, you should, but also pay attention to the way people respond to your work. It's information. You don't always have to do it, but it's information to think about and see. And, sometimes take a left turn and maybe go a little further with that. Like, I didn't think I was gonna be drawing houses much, but that became like a thing for a year. People were commissioning me to draw their childhood homes.
People love, I mean, because it's like that architecture,
Yes.
people just love that. Yeah.
I didn't know. And that's how I learned. I was like, that's what the people told me. I'm like, let's do it. So then I just started, doing that. And that created a ton of extra work for me. Again, because I had to be realistic with myself, because I was like, maybe one day I can do this full time. But I'm like, I am like in the middle of a career. I am finishing grad school, and we wanted to start a family. Like, life is happening. And that's a little bit depressing, honestly, in a weird way. Like, I was kind of like, oh, I think I just kind of figured out my path, and I went a different way. And that's a journey too. But it's just, you can draw forever. Like, I was like, tell me, like, if I ask you, like, it doesn't have to happen today. You can take your time with this. This is a long game. And I think even artists,
like, you're not going to lose the skill.
Right. Even people who've only done art from the beginning, it's a long game for them too. It's like, there's nothing instantaneous about this kind of love of creating. And thankfully, I enjoy the tedious aspect of it. I actually enjoy, like, working with clients, and if they go back and forth forever, I'm like, let's talk. I'm like, let's get there, let's collaborate. Like, I get into that, the tedious part of painting and drawing. I like that part. It doesn't feel so painful, and I just create very realistic expectations for myself. I think that's really a big part of it. So to answer that question, it's really, like I said, just starting to put myself out there, having the resources, having the space, and then keep going. Just keep putting stuff out there. And then the emails start coming. And I don't have a ton of followers on Instagram, but I get contacted all the time for projects, really interesting projects, and that align with things that I like and care about without me even going for them. And so that is really what has propelled everything forward. Each client project is a different learning experience for me, and I try to make the most of it. So, yeah.
Well, no, I love that. I mean, first of all, thank you for even bringing up the followers. I was actually in a Clubhouse room the other day, and I was talking just about followers, because we were talking about Instagram. And I'm like, people, do not be getting caught up with the number of followers, because somebody could have 100,000 followers and not be making any money, and somebody could have 500 followers and be making 6 figures a year. It's really just about the connections that you're making, and the right people seeing you, and the right people discovering you, right?
Yes.
Like, the number, it's nice. It feels like you have that social proof, but if no one is contacting you, if no one is giving you money, it's really just a number.
It is. And can we talk about money, please? Because that was the whole spirit of all this anyway. It's just that you also have to be like, I think most artists that I see or that I know have multiple avenues of things that they're doing. And so, and I don't mean like multiple styles or whatever, but I mean, like, you might be selling art on one venue, you might be having clients in another area, You might
Mm-hmm.
be teaching in one space. And the culmination of all those things is how you make your yearly income. And some artists are really great, I think, about showing the transparency of that, because I know that's been very helpful for me to try to create
Mm-hmm.
a realistic picture. But I do think it's important for
Diversify
people,
your income. Yeah.
yes, diversify your income, and then take at the end of the year or quarterly or whatever makes sense to you, like look at how much time and effort you're putting into each of those areas and what you're getting in return. And
Mm.
not just financially, but also just like other value, because you have to write down the number. Like, how much
Mm-hmm.
money do I want to make this year? How much money is it going to take me to leave this job? What does it look like to get there? And really draw out those goals. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's, gosh, at this rate, it could take me 7 years to do that. And then either make peace with that or decide if you're going to accelerate it, because that can help you not have the angst of worrying about things like maybe taking a leap from working another job or turning off one of those revenues because they're tedious and you don't enjoy it. I think that these things are constantly fluctuating, and I'm sure you've heard that from lots of people, but it's definitely, I think, an important part to be honest with yourself. And then also just what success looks like for you, because success might not be in the money either and shouldn't be for everyone. It could just be in building that community, having your art seen, maybe just having a little extra money on the side, or just having a space where you feel like you're making a difference. It could really look differently for you, and you don't have to box it into what it means. There's no one definition of a successful artist. It's
Mm-hmm.
how does it build your life today? And maybe in 10 years that's different. But just having those honest conversations with yourself, I think, are really important. And that's the only way I feel like I can be like, I'm so happy doing what I'm doing because of that. Not just because I can draw, but because I've incorporated into what it means to me today and where I want to go.
I love all that, because one thing that I want creatives not to be afraid of is to think and talk about money, because
Yeah.
I think sometimes in this society, because of certain things, dirty, like money has become like this dirty thing, right? Like, it's,
Yeah.
oh, I don't want people to think I'm just about the money, or, oh, well, I don't want to talk about the money part because I don't want people to think that I'm only about the money. But it's like, you have to eat, you have to
Yeah.
value yourself, right?
Yeah.
And it's like money isn't a dirty thing, right?
No.
It's how we sustain ourselves, it's how we accomplish goals, it's how we pay for education and trips and build wealth, generational wealth. Like, you need to think and talk about those things, and it's okay to be successful, and it's okay to want to be successful too. It's not to say it should be the only thing that's guiding you, but it's
Right.
okay if you have goals and dreams of making a certain amount of money, right?
Yeah. And I do think you kind of have to have your own trial and error with that kind of thing. There's so much information on there, but like, how do I price this or how do I price that? And there's so many factors.
Mm.
But once you do it enough, you start to find a formula that you're like, okay, this takes me this much time. This is not fun. This is so much fun. I do this for free. Like, you just have to start kind of creating your business model to meet your goals. I mean, just quite literally. And I don't think that if anyone wants to make a living with their art or wants art to have some kind of financial contribution to their life, to shy away from those thoughts. But I also encourage, if art makes you happy and if it's your therapy, then don't ruin that with making it work either. I think it was, oh, what's
Mm.
that book? Big
Big
Magic.
Magic. Ah, I knew.
When she said
Yes, I
that,
love that book.
ah, that
I love
I was
that
reading
book.
on the bus. I was reading on the Metro bus to and from work, and when she said, "I didn't make art pay my bills for a long
Yes.
time," I was
Yes.
like, "Preach," because it's so true. It's just like
It
sometimes you
changes
have to it.
things.
Yeah, sometimes you have to give it space to incubate and grow
Yeah.
and be good, but without putting that pressure on it. And then the opportunity happens where, okay, now it really can sustain, and it has to
Mm-hmm.
go through its own phases. And I personally, each year I have different goals around that. I definitely had a year where I was like, I want to really see what it's like to be showing work, and I really want to meet people. I have small kids. I couldn't go to events. So I had to make a very intentional effort about that early on in
Mm.
doing this. And I just, anytime someone asked me to do a show, I said yes. And I met so many people, and I would just find a way to break away. And I was showing art in just local spaces. And then the next year I was like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. But those relationships I made served the clients that I got the next year. And I just put my
Yeah.
head down doing client work the following year. And I learned
Mm-hmm.
from each of those experiences, and I have to go back and forth sometimes based on what's happening, and we have to react to what's happening in the world. So yeah, my point
Mm.
is that you have to be flexible with that in order to find your way. And again, if you can't afford to do that, then it's also, again, are these decisions, do you want to work somewhere else? Is it going to be the coffee shop or the admin job for a while too, while you're doing the art? Or is it something that needs to be more of a pastime? And like, we all have to make these decisions because our wellness has to come first. And I'm just big about that. I think you have to, not that, and that's not saying like you have to be wealthy. It just means like you have to take care of yourself. And for me, that
Your
wasn't just
health.
money. When I was younger, it was like I needed time to be with me and not have that
Mm-hmm.
pressure. And so again, that's different for everyone, but I just think it's important to say.
Now, question before, because I want to definitely get into like how you got into like murals and things like that. But do
Mm-hmm.
you now do this full time, or is
No,
this kind of your nights and weekends?
it is still part time, though
Mm.
I would say I put in full time hours.
Oh, for sure. I totally
um,
listening to the
and
podcast. I mean, I feel like it's almost like
yeah,
a full time job, but on
yeah.
nights and weekends, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I've actually, and I think, and this is just me, but where I'm at in my life is that I have to kind of incorporate what work looks like with my family life and what
Mm-hmm.
I want that to look like. And there's a world where I dream, what I think art can do for me or entrepreneurship can do for me eventually is give me some of the freedoms to be with my kids at certain points in their lives that they're going to come into, where maybe I don't have to be at work from 2 to 4, but I can work the rest of the night. And I think that is also very enticing, like something that excites me about trying to build up my art entrepreneur kind of world.
Mm-hmm.
Again, for me to do that in a way that makes sense for the amount of responsibility I have in my life right now, it's going to take me, I mean, I say this, I mean, who knows, life, amazing things can happen, but I really think it's going to take me a number of years to get to that place
Which is
based on,
okay. Yeah.
which is totally fine because what I'm building now, I realize is going to prepare me for that time, and it won't freak me out. I did entertain the idea of it in the shorter term. The pandemic happened, and
The
it's like,
whole world changed.
I said, look. And that's the whole other story, but yeah, I think that I think sitting with what all these goals look like together in your whole life, in your world, and blending them in a way that makes your life full and happy and doesn't feel like, I gotta do this now or I'm never gonna be happy, like, that's not, it doesn't have to be that way. I think that's my point, but
No, no, no.
yeah.
I get it. I mean, it goes back to the book Big Magic, right? Like
Hmm.
she waited for years
Yeah,
before
yeah,
she allowed her writing to pay her bills. And I think
yeah,
there's something to be said about that. You
yeah.
have to wait for the right timing, and you have to be okay if maybe the timing never comes. Maybe it you are never supposed to put pressure on the things you love to pay your bills.
Hmm.
Like maybe you like your 9 to 5 and the stability that it brings, and you love being able to have the creative freedom without the pressure of it paying your bills,
Yeah,
and continue to do your art that way. So I feel like it's like what's meant to be will be. You just have to pay attention to the signs, and if the time is right to make a move, you make the move, but you don't force it, you know?
right.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's someone else on one of your shows who was talking about that too. Don't make your jump so difficult on
Right.
yourself if you something would do. Like, especially if you don't have to. Sometimes we're pushing the corner and amazing things happens when we're backed up against a corner. But when you have, sometimes having choices is the most nerve-wracking thing because you're like, I could just mess this whole thing up. I am forgetting the name of the artist right now, and I might have to tell you so you can add it to the notes later. But there's a gentleman who's a painter, and I listened to his story one day and it moved me so much because I don't always hear the kind of older returning back artist stories, but he's a fine art painter now and he's blown up, and I think he's in his like late 50s or early 60s. But he studied some architecture and design growing up, but then went into the military and came back and to the DC area and has been working like IT, military IT kind of stuff. And I remember him saying in his story, which really resonated with me on the same point, that he had been painting like this all night, every night, and wanted it to happen, and came at a moment where he realized, like, I could make this jump right now.
Mm-hmm.
And, but then realized like it just wouldn't be sensible for him. And he waited 10 more years.
Mm.
Like, he just continued doing shows, he continued painting, and he just practiced his craft. And
Mm-hmm.
then, and people, I mean, he said he had like a high security clearance. And people were like, "Are you crazy? Why would you leave that?" And eventually he did leave it, and his exploded into this beautiful now new career that he has since like probably his early 50s. And I am just like, that is so, that's someone like me, like those stories that I hear just, oh, they fill my heart up, because it doesn't make me feel like I'm losing out or missing time or miss the boat or whatever. It just
Mm-hmm.
tells me like your time is your time for things. And I recognize like right now is the time for me, just like giving as much as I can out to the world and creating as much as I can from my heart. And that when, you know, that hopefully I'll have an opportunity where this could just be it. Who knows? But if not, this is
Mm-hmm.
also pretty great. So that's really that's where I'm at today.
Mm.
In a few years I could say something different, but
I love it. I mean,
here we are.
this is the season you're in right now, and that season
Exactly.
will change. And when it does, then you'll figure out what the next step is. No, I
Hmm.
100% get it. As we wrap up here a little bit, I just want to, we talked about diversifying your income. And even like
Hmm.
I'm looking at your website right now, and it says that you do illustration, murals, branding, and identity. So I
Hmm.
know some of the listeners are looking at that and they're like, wow, so wait a minute, she doesn't do this full time. How does she have time to do illustration, murals, and branding? And how was she able to get into all of that? Just curious, how did you get into murals, and how does branding even come into play? And just curious, just
Hmm.
how does that makeup define like your portfolio? How much is
Sure.
murals, I guess? How much is illustration, and how much is branding?
Year to year it's different. And now I would say I've had my LLC for about 7 years now. And the past 3 years, it's been a combination of those three things. I was doing some other things before, but like I said, doing more the watercolor painting and more commission based stuff. But two things. One, I can only take on so much. So
Mm-hmm.
I am in that weird crossroad where I am potentially turning work away or not doing the kind of outreach that I would be doing if I had more time. That's hard on my heart sometimes. But again, accepting where I'm. The other part is really just a lot of those jobs have come to me over time, and I've learned as I did them. Something like murals is really just, it's something the first one I did, I'd done a few when I was a kid, but done professionally was when I started my LLC. I had some friends that had a business and they were opening, and they said, could we commission you to do a mural? And I was like, yeah.
Sure.
Luckily I had some experience where my brother actually hosts these big mural events at times. And so I had seen and done a little assisting around
Mm.
like really great muralists, and understood demystify it for myself a bit. And that's anything else, like any creative process is a series of steps. So if you can really break it down and make the attempt, it's scary, but you learn from that. And that first one, it turned out good. And those are actually, murals are much more lucrative than illustrations. They're a lot more
Mm-hmm.
work, and there's a different risk at play, but I love them because I like being able to crank something out in a week and walk away from the job in a way. And it's like, wow, that was like so impactful, and seeing your work large scale is super fun. Illustration is something I can do very easily between my iPad and my computer at night. And so that's why I appreciate it. But again, these jobs, like, they'll come to me and then I'll have some regular clients. So, but especially with branding, when the branding work comes out, is that it's often just like working relationships with certain companies that are trying to do, or we're promoting for events, or we want you to design for this particular campaign or something like that. And that
Mm.
becomes like an ongoing timeline of work. So for me, organizing myself as far as like being, again, honest, what I can take on when someone reaches out to me, and then spacing it out over the course of 6 months, because most gigs aren't like, we need this tomorrow. um,
Mm-hmm.
Most gigs are like, this is a project, we're starting to interact, we're emailing, where I'm doing more of that kind of engagement work with them, and then I'm spending my nights just creating and working and going back and forth. It's a lot. I don't I It's not, if you're not up for it, especially if you
Yeah.
work and have a life like me. It's not great, but that is really how you mix it up. I think it's just, if you don't have the person asking you to do the work, going out and reaching out to them. And then for me, having these clients is I always just share the work that I like doing. And most of them can be like, I really like the style of this X you posted. Can we do something like that? And I'm like,
Mm.
absolutely. I already know how to do it. Like I'm sketching at the time things that I like, and I might already have something I can show them that's an inspiration from it. So it really is just incorporating what I would do anyway for fun for someone else. And that's the synergy. That's the only way I can do this all the time. I do not take on client work right now that's like, just do this layout for me,
Mm.
because it's not advancing my portfolio. It's not, even if they maybe paid me exorbitant amount of money, okay, well then that can fund me to do something else for my work.
Right.
But I think I have to be really selective about those projects because I already have a full-time job. If I was working this full-time, I would take on those jobs for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would need that extra revenue stream, so to speak. But the jobs that are the most lucrative that people have budgets for are generally these branding projects and mural projects. And those can really fuel a lot for me throughout the year so that I can take on other things and I can reinvest in the business. So yeah, but with that said, like last year, I've sold more prints than I've ever sold. And that's just because of the pandemic. Like,
Right.
people are buying art. People want things from creators. And that wasn't necessarily the case 2 years ago as much for me. I actually was kind of like, I have to put that aside for a bit so I can focus on more of the branding kind of work and maybe getting more editorial clients and things like that. So I have to shift a lot. And it's really, again, I set it as a year. I'm like, this year I want to accomplish these two things, and everything I do has to lead up to those two things. And over the
Mm.
course of the 7 years, now it is illustration, branding, murals, blah, 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 because now I have enough of those projects and clients where I'm like, if someone were to reach out to me, I know I would like to do, those are things I like doing the most. So I hope that answers the question, but yeah.
I did, because sorry, that was like a 5-part question I asked you, so that was that was not
I think, yeah.
articulated the best way possible. But you answered, I think, all 5 questions, so thank you.
Okay, good. No problem.
Um, no, this is great. Oh my God, I could talk to you forever, but let me get to my wrap up questions because this has been
Okay,
such a great episode. Okay,
thank you.
so how do you stay organized? You
Hmm.
have like different, just all kind of things happening, right? Like
Yeah.
murals are different from branding, that's different from
Hmm.
illustrations, that's different from
Hmm.
prints, that's different from all the things. Like, how do you, keep it all together?
Yeah. So again, luckily, and for myself, because I'm like someone who works so much in project management in my other life, I have been able to experiment with a lot, like the Asanas, the Evernotes, the OneNotes. Like I've had a lot of experience with that and learning things like Excel. The bottom line for me, actually, when I do my artwork, I've tried to use all those things, not work. For me, it's come down to really three methods. One, I actually I like Excel because I've just gotten used to it. I like having an Excel document that has my yearly strategy lists and the tabs. So it's in one document. That for me is like my mothership document, so to speak. And then that trickles down into what I've now come to use a lot with, especially the craziness of life this past year, is Google Tasks has been really useful for me. It doesn't sound not very sexy. It's just the way I can dump those lists, because so much for me is I have a million things going on. And so I have to take notes throughout the day. Like I get struck inspiration for something. I'll see something on TV. I'm like, oh, that looks so cool. That music video. I love that color. I have to note things. There's a quote I
Mm-hmm.
hear. There's an interview I hear. I just stop on my phone. I have to be able to do it on my phone clearly. When I would be on the metro, I would spend my whole time doing my lists of like things I wanted to work with, because by the time I sit down to do work at 9 p.m., I need to go. I need to be ready to go. And so I need to go
Mm-hmm.
directly to that list and be like, we're working on this right now. And so that's a big part of it. But I think the organization for me is really always about keeping those overarching goals in check with what I'm doing every day. If I can definitely start working on something and I'll be like, is this what I said I was going to do? And be like, Justine, stop. Like, Don't do that. That's not a proper use of your time. You said you wanted to do X. Let's, at least for this quarter, try to continue doing that and just continue to take stock of that. I use Post-it, kind of like, I take those big goals, I put those on my wall, because if I'm sitting at my desk, I need to look up and be like, have I touched on all these things? Am I, this year I'm focusing on, say, getting more mural clients. Like, have I done anything in the past month to do that? Have I shared anything that's going to attract someone for that kind of work? And so that everything I do is tying back to those bigger things. I don't have any other like cool stuff. Like I said, I tried to do some of those other apps and things, and it really just came down to my ability to keep a very clear task list and a strong strategy document. Outside of that, therapeutically, I'm someone who doesn't like my handwriting, though I love notebooks and things. And so I actually do have to type my notes. But in the morning, like ritualistically, I need a clean desk, my coffee, and a notebook. And I also have to physically write it down in the morning a bit too. Just, it's something about the way
something about it, writing it down, right? Yeah. No, I get it. I always put everything electronically, but yeah.
Yeah. Like, I can't go back to it and read it later. I'm like, what did I write? But it's like something about the process of that sets me in motion. And those 2-3 hours of productivity just are like that much more. I get that much more done. Yeah, I do. I love that segment of your show because I'm always like, what are other people doing?
What are they doing? Yeah. And it's all about what works for you. But I always love hearing like how people stay organized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Minimal is a style of my work, but it's also a way of life. Like, I also I'm not a clutter person. I think that helps.
So then you're right. Because if you're not like someone, and this is for you listeners out there, if you are kind of a clutter bug, that's okay. Do you? No judgment.
Absolutely. No, because some people, like, they make more sense in that. Like, some of the smartest people have the messiest desks, I swear.
They do. And I remember reading an article on it too. And I forgot, they had a term for people who basically operate in organized chaos, I guess. And they could have the messiest desk, but they'll be like, my stapler is here. Here's that note I wrote the other day. Whereas someone like me, I'd be like, oh my God, this is crazy. So I get what you're saying. If you are very organized, I don't know, it's easier to, I guess, keep track of things or keep things simpler. It just depends on how you're wired, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if I lose 20 minutes looking for something, I am angry. My time is so tight. So I find that so funny. It just makes me think, I'm sorry, I know we're wrapping up, but like the Spider-Man movie, The Spider-Verse, there's a scene where he goes to Doc Ock's desk and he says, fix your desktop, lady. Like, she has like a million things and he's just genius. But it's like her desktop is just, I was like, oh, that would drive me crazy. But the joke really hit home because
insane. Like when I see people with more than 5 icons on their desktop, I'm like, what are you doing? I'm judging you people. Yes, I am judging you because I'm like, oh my goodness. Especially if you have 100 icons and they're not even lined up. They're just like randomly placed.
Right.
But some people love that though. Like they know where everything is. They're like, I can see it, right? And they're like, this is how I operate. So it's funny how your brain works.
I mean, there's a dark side to over organizing because that's a procrastination for sure. Like sometimes I'm just like, I just spent way too much time trying to like neatly like make my shelf look pretty. I'm like, get to work, girl. I guess there's two sides to it.
No, but it's true. I was like doing my little Notion video the other day and I was like, okay, Nache, you in here organizing more stuff in Notion instead of recording a video. No, like you need to do what you said you were going to do. Stop organizing stuff and record the video.
100%.
But it's, that organization, it's a blessing and a curse. And then what is your hobby? Like, do you have something outside of illustration or painting? Do you have something else you love?
Wow. Right now, yeah, I mean, there's lots of things. I mean, I'm an athlete. I also grew up playing a lot of sports. I love exercise and I love things around wellness. And that is also what kind of drove that other part of my career. I have 2 small kids and really art is my whole haven, whatever that means. And it doesn't necessarily mean like I'm drawing. I love looking at magazines. I love going to museums. I love art history. I can spend hours on Pinterest. Like, it's just, those things really soothe me. Interior design in general, I love, even though I don't like work in that space, there's something about architecture and looking at spaces that I really love. I like to read, so when I can. But those are really the things for me. I like to consider myself a peace seeker. Like, I'm always looking for what's going to bring me some quiet and some peace in the moment, and that brings me joy. And definitely things around exercise and even organizing and space. And it's something that, if I don't feel like drawing, I kind of start doing something with that. It's meditative. Yeah, that's all I could think of. Really, I'm
I
so
love it.
busy.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's so much. Everyone's like, how are you doing it? I'm like, I don't know, but I'm okay.
I always tell people there's 24 hours in every day, because sometimes people are like, Nache, how do you do all the things? And I'm like, it seems like a lot, but I'm like, you have just as much time as I do. And it's just about how you organize your time. And then when you start
Yeah.
paying attention to what you actually do in a day, then you make more space for all the
Yeah.
things.
I
Because
think,
you
yeah,
realize there's
definitely
so much.
doing that accounting of everything all the time
Right.
is huge. And that takes time. Again, as I say, people are like, if you're like 22 and you're like, it's not, it was not like this 15 years ago.
Oh, no, for sure.
So,
It takes time. I have a birthday this month. I'm 42, about to go
hey.
43. And yeah, in my 20s, if you met Nache in her 20s, I was trying to get it together. It was like baby productive Nache. It was like,
It's in there. It just hasn't
it
been
was
fine
there.
tuned yet.
I was perfecting it. And it wasn't into the
Absolutely.
30s where I got it. I feel like I really got it together. So it
Yes.
does. It takes time.
Yeah. And you have to have that fuel. I think that I reflect on that. I'm like, oh, every minute I've lost, I'm making up for right now. And that makes me happy. That excites me. So I think, yeah, drive matters when it's not always there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not anything to be ashamed of either. Because like I said, we all have different, life is, especially now in a pandemic, life is a lot. And we have to be gentle with ourselves. So if it serves you.
Oh, no, I agree 100%. Wow, this has been great, Justine. Can you tell
Mm-hmm.
the listeners where can they find you? Your website, social media, anything you'd like them to know?
Sure. The main places are my website, which is www.justineswindell.com. That's Justine, like Justin with the E at the end, and Swindell, like the computer, Dell. And my Instagram is Justine Swindell Art. Those are the two main places. I can't manage any other accounts. That's where I engage with people the most. That's by me.
Perfect. Well, thanks for sharing your story and coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Okay, so what did I tell you guys? An amazing, amazing episode. And if you're listening to my voice right now, that means you listened all the way to the end. Sorry, I have no prize for you, but to say thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Anyway, the show notes for this page is at nachesnow.com/124. If you love this episode, please share, share, share. I would love to get it out and trying to get a boost for this season 8 to get more listeners and share more of these stories. Of course, if you want to hear more from me, make sure you sign up for my newsletter. You can go to nachesnow.com/newsletter. If you're already on the website right now, just go to the bottom of my about page and you can actually choose to sign up for the business list, the productivity list, or both. But let's stay in touch. Anytime I have some thoughts or anything I want to share, I try to put it out on a newsletter just to make sure that you guys are informed of any new trends or resources that are out there. And all the show notes, like I said, are mentioned, but I just want to say that book that we both were like, what? Big Magic is so amazing. I really love that book. You guys have heard me mentioning it before. It hits some people, it doesn't hit other people, but for me, that book just really resonated with me because it's all about not putting pressure on your passion and really stepping out when you're supposed to. And so if you haven't heard of that book, definitely check it out. Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert. It is amazing. Okay, folks. Well, back. So I will be in your ear next week. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you love this episode, please rate me 5 stars or give me a thumbs up on YouTube or whatever the rating mechanism is wherever you're listening. Please be sure to give a positive rating. All right. Have a beautiful week, and I will be sure to chat with you all soon. Talk to you later. Bye.